Less than 12 hours, more than 150 nations will sign a landmark agreement on climate change, and China and the United States are leading the way. The United Nations is hosting the signing ceremony at its headquarters in New York, and that's where we find CCTV's Nathan King, and a lot of anticipation for this. But there's also some skepticism, isn't there, Nathan?
You're absolutely right, Mike. Let's take the anticipation first. 165 countries expected to sign on to that landmark climate convention agreed in December last year in Paris. China and the US, as you said, leading the way. They actually led the way before Paris by coming to that climate agreement. Remember, they represent 40% of emissions together, whereby China caps its emissions by 2030 while the US is reducing them. That really matters because that squared the circle between developed and developing nations who, of course, are growing, and developed nations who are responsible for a lot of emissions. And that led the way to Paris. But back to here, yeah, we're expecting 165 countries to sign on, but there is only signing going on here. They agreed in Paris, they are signing on here at the United Nations, but there's also something called joining the treaty, which means basically starting to implement those things that countries signed on to, which of course is overall keeping temperature growth below 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and also setting up a mechanism to fund developing countries to deal with climate change. So still a lot to be worked out.
Besides the signings, there are a lot of other events going on as well, aren't there?
Absolutely right. And, you know, the US and China leading the way. By the way, John Kerry, US Secretary of State, will be here. We also have Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli from China leading the way. Also the former Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi, who is now a state councillor. So very high level partition by them. And they're going to be part of a big discussion along with China's chief negotiator in Paris about best practices of implementation. This is where the China and US can really help out. Remember, the price of things like solar power have plummeted, largely thanks to China expanding massively, but it only represents 10% of global energy use right now. So there's been lots of pushing about best practices in the US, China, and elsewhere. The big question is on other emitters. Countries like India, for example, which have to ratify this treaty through their parliament. India has the dirtiest cities in the world in terms of emissions, and the dirtiest river, the Ganges. So it'd be really interesting to see if the third or fourth biggest emitters also come on board. There's actually a target here of 55 countries and 55% of global emitters coming on board, not just signing the treaty, but joining the treaty by the end of this year. Why is that important? We have a US presidential election coming up, and as you know, the Republican Party here are full of climate change deniers, and there's a real worry that if the world doesn't move quickly, the US may actually step back from this. So there's a big global picture here, but also a big US domestic politics could get in the way.
Yeah, it's complicated. Nathan King, thanks so much.